Sometimes in life, you just make mistakes. And for prideful people, it can be the most difficult thing to admit sometimes. Case in point, and Exhibit A is the Ford family's decision to bring back Matt Patricia as the head coach of the Detroit Lions with a record of 10, 25, and 1. One could argue the results on the field have been less than impressive. With 2 seasons and a quarter of this one now in the books, the question is it too late to salvage the season and the Patriot of the North philosophy here in Detroit? Jeremy Reisman is the managing editor of Pride of Detroit, an online publication dedicated to covering everything relating to the Detroit Lions. He joined me this week to provide a progress report, a status update, and the future of the franchise and where they go from here. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. So, Jeremy, if you're ready, we'll welcome you to the program, and we're excited to talk to you about Lions football this morning, no matter how painful it may be. So, good to see you this morning, and thanks so much for being here.
Sure, no problem.
Jeremy, I'm going to start you off by simply asking you what it's going to take for Sheila Fordham to finally realize that Matt Patricia's direction that he's taken the franchise simply isn't working.
Well, I think it's going to take a big loss, a big kind of maybe on a national stage. I've kind of in my mind already circled that Thanksgiving game against the Texans. If we saw what the Texans have already done, they fired their GM, they fired their head coach, same guy, Bill O'Brien. If the Lions lose that game on Thanksgiving, I think that could be a place where you see, the national embarrassment, it's hard to say. I mean, with Sheila Fordham, we don't really know what her standard operating procedure is. We don't know what makes her tick. Maybe she's still kind of figuring out what's going on inside of the organization. So maybe that means an off-season firing is potentially more likely than a mid-season one. But if things get as bad as they could, which 1-6, 1-7, 1-8, whatever. I think we could potentially reach a fever pitch in which she decides to move on. But the way things are going, it looks like we'll eventually get there. It's just hard to know when we'll get there based on just having a new owner that we don't really have an idea of what her track record's like.
Now, she was in the discussions last December to bring both Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia back. So what do you think was said in those meetings, and why do you think it hasn't translated onto the field yet?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think the majority of that conversation seems like, based on some of the reports we heard out, was just basically this year 3 was going to be critical. I think Sheila Fordham wanted to show a little bit of patience, and I understand that. When you do kind of do a major overhaul of the roster, and we can say maybe Matt Patricia didn't need to do one given where Jim Caldwell had this team back in 2017, but regardless, he did do a major overhaul of this roster and culture, and that does take time. And so I understand the idea of letting him play out this year 3 and see what happens. But you're right, it hasn't translated on the field, and I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think there hasn't been great drafting. We see a lot of high draft picks like Jared Davis, Jelani Tavai, even Tracy Walker a little bit, not really improving in the way that they should. And we also saw them kind of purge out some talented players in Darius Slay and Quandre Diggs and Golden Tate for various reasons. And so I don't think the talent is necessarily there. And obviously the scheme isn't working as it's supposed to, especially there on defense. So there's really a lot of reasons. And I think the common denominator between all of them are probably Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, which is why those two are so much under fire after just 4 weeks in the season.
Now, the Lions, as you know, spent some money on Vine to bring him over from Philly. They spent about $10 million a year on him, and now he's moved from tackle to guard because Tyrone Crosby has played better than him. So do you think that was a miscalculation on Bob Quinn's part? And what do you think of his progress so far as a member of the Lions?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the most curious moves during the offseason, and one that I think immediately kind of raised some red flags just because he's basically been a backup most of his career. And so giving him that big of a contract was definitely a risk. Now, I think part of the reason they gave him that big contract was because of his versatility. And I know he had a rough game against Arizona in his, first game at guard with the Lions, and I think he cleaned it up a little bit in the following week. I don't want to necessarily judge a pick, 4 games in the season, still early. I think the ultimate plan is still to probably move him back to tackle once Joe Dahl is healthy. So then you can have Jonah Jackson back at right guard, Joe Dahl at left guard, and then I think you'll probably see Vaitai back at tackle. I think that's where he fits the best and makes the most sense for what you're paying him as well. And we also have to remember that Vaitai entered the season with a foot injury, didn't even play in the first game. So I think you give him a little bit of credit for coming back. You give him a little leeway, see what happens. I think you're not going to make or break his contract in the first year. You signed him long term. You want to see how he does long term. So I'm willing to kind of play the waiting game there with Vaitai, but early signs are, this may have been the wrong move.
Now, every time I talk Lions football this season, I always ask this question to whoever I'm speaking to. And so I'll ask you just so you don't feel left out of the party. But anyway, when we look at Matt Patricia and the blown leads, I think the Lions now hold the NFL record for blown leads. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on why you think it continues to happen. Certainly, we saw what happened week 1 against the Bears and throughout the rest of the quarter of this season. So I'm wondering your thoughts on why the Lions can't hold a lead under Matt Patricia.
Yeah, that's also a really, really good question. I do think we live in a different era of football in that, no multi-score lead, no double-digit lead is safe. I mean, we're recording this on Tuesday night right after the Saints, eclipsed a 17-point deficit and won on Monday Night Football. And so I think that's just kind of the new normal in the NFL, is that no lead is really safe. But that being said, you'd like to see the Lions at least hold on to them every now and then. And yeah, last year was really bad in it. They're off to a bad start to it this year. And I think honestly, a lot of it just comes down to defense. This team isn't capable of getting a late game stop. And if that's the case, teams are just going to throw all over them. The pass defense itself has been really, really bad. And this is a bend, don't break kind of defense. And so you're going to see a lot of these long, late game drives that the Lions are going to give up. And the whole purpose of those bend, don't break defenses is to not break in the red zone. Unfortunately, the Lions have had a lot of issues with their secondary. So they're breaking in the red zone there. They're giving up touchdowns instead of field goals. And then their offense is just kind of, it's inconsistent. We see them off to hot starts. We see them kind of cool off. We see them maybe get into a little bit of a conservative mode late in games. We know Matt Patricia loves to run the ball, and this team hasn't been capable of running the ball when the other team is expecting it. They've been better at running the ball in 2020, but when the other team is expecting it, when you're in those third and shorts, when you're on the goal line, when you're trying to run out the clock with 5 minutes left, they haven't been as successful at running the ball. So offensively, they're not helping out their defense, and their defense just hasn't been up to par really since Matt Patricia came into town.
Now, I'm also curious to get your thoughts on what Trey Flowers had to say about the defense when he said that if you don't force an offense to have to throw on third down, they won't do it. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on those comments as a whole.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. Because the Lions have been so bad at stopping the run, which is what Matt Patricia really aims to do. They're finding themselves in a lot of third and shorts, a lot of third and ones, third and twos, third and threes, and that really opens up the offense to confuse the defense. What you really want is to be in those third and medium, third and longs. That way, you can have a guy like Trey Flowers kind of pin his ears back, rush the passer, and maybe we see the Lions pass rush, improve because it's obviously been awful over the past 2 years. There's really no way of hiding it. And so if you get into more situations, more scenarios where you're third and 8, third and 9, third and 13, third and 14, you probably see a better Lions pass rush. You probably see them be a little more aggressive. But when you're in those third and ones, third and twos, it's hard to be aggressive. It's hard to blitz knowing that they could run a draw play right by you. And so I think there is some truth to that. Obviously, if the team was a little bit better on first and second down, and that probably includes pass rush, if you get a sack on first down, then suddenly you do find yourself maybe in those situations on third down. The team undoubtedly needs to just be better on first and second down, and I think that would open things up on third down. But I think even besides that, there are other pass rush issues in terms of not having a premier pass rusher. Trey Flowers is good at that, but not a guy that you necessarily have to game plan for. And other than him, there's really not a lot of guys that can rush a passer on this roster right now.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. How do you think they fix the defense? One may say Julian Okora can stop being a healthy scratch and see what he can actually do on the field. So I'm wondering your thoughts on how to fix the Lions defense.
It's it's really tough. If I knew how to do that, I might be the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions right now. I think the biggest issue that they're having right now is that linebacking core, and maybe Julian Okwara does help that. When he's good enough and ready enough to be there on the field on a regular basis, because he does bring a little bit more pass rush than I think anyone else that can come off the edge there at the linebacking crew. But unfortunately, you're looking at guys like Jelani Tavai, like Jared Davis, like Christian Jones, guys who are just not playing to the ability that I think this coaching staff thought they were capable of playing, and include stopping the run, gap integrity, making sure that the run game, they're there to stop the run game. Because honestly, I think some of that front four, John Pennicini, Danny Shelton, they're not playing terribly, but the linebackers aren't getting free. The linebackers aren't making tackles. They're overcommitting to their gap assignments. And so I think they just need to really, really coach up that linebacking crew. And I don't know if this set of players is capable of improving at the levels that they need to be successful, but that's where the focus needs to be. And I hope that's where the focus was in the bye week, I should say.
So you've talked a lot about personnel during our conversation this morning. So I'm wondering, do you think it's an indictment on Bob Quinn's ability to assess and evaluate talent, why this team is so bad?
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. I mean, like I said, the draft picks just aren't catching on like they should be. And especially those early ones. I mean, you're spending second round picks on running backs and it's not working. You're drafting linebackers that only fit your system. And then they don't seem particularly good at them either. You got a guy like Julian Okwara who's on the bench most of the time. You trade away Darius Slay and you bring in Desmond Trufant to be his replacement, and he hasn't played particularly well. I look around this roster right now and I see a bunch of guys that just wouldn't be starters elsewhere. And yeah, you have to absolutely point to Bob Quinn as the issue there. And whether it's, problems with dealing with, like I said, they sent away some talented players, and whether it was because of their personality or their scheme fit or whatever, you send away that kind of talent and you're incapable of replacing it. Well, that's on you. And so I do think Bob Quinn holds a lot of responsibility for what's happening, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And I would assume that he kind of blames himself as well, because I don't see where else you can point the blame there with such little talent there on the defensive side of the ball.
Now tell me, you don't think if they do fire Matt Patricia, Bob Quinn will get a crack at hiring a second coach, do you?
I don't. I think this is year 5. I would be hard pressed to look at the roster when he took over and really see that it's improved much at all, really anywhere. Maybe at wide receiver. That's it. And even then, like you had Kelvin Johnson 5 years ago, and now you don't. Not that that's necessarily his fault, but yeah, I think one of the most telling things Bob Quinn has ever really said, and it's a reason why I would not give him another shot with a new head coach, is that when he hired Matt Patricia, and then after that first draft, he said this was one of the most comfortable drafts for me because I'm drafting for a head coach in a system that I know. And so that tells to me like he feels most comfortable and at his best when he's, drafting and accumulating talent for a Patriot style offense and a Patriot style defense. Well, I think we can all agree that the Lions probably aren't going to go back to that Patriots tree if they fire Matt Patricia. So if that's the case, then we're talking about Bob Quinn drafting again for a system that maybe he's not as comfortable with. And I certainly don't want that. I think Lions fans probably don't want that. So, yeah, I think if the Lions move on from Matt Patricia, they almost have to move on from Bob Quinn as well.
So, what type of coach and situation would you like to see the Ford family pursue?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm necessarily tied to, I want an offensive minded coach. I want a defensive minded coach. I want a up and comer. I want a proven commodity. There, I'm not really that picky because I do feel like you can find that kind of diamond in the rough if you do your research, or you can succeed with an offensive minded coach or a defensive minded coach. The one thing that I would really like though is a coach that's, I would say, just a good leader, a guy that will have the players get behind them, one that they respect. Not to say that the players in Detroit now don't respect Matt Patricia, but obviously there's been some butting of the heads between personalities. And so I want a coach that can deal with all sorts of personalities. If they've got a guy that, likes to dance in the end zone, or they got a guy that likes to goof around a little bit, they can handle that. If they've got a guy that's a hard-nosed guy that's all work, they can handle that. I just want a guy who's malleable, can deal with a bunch of different personalities, because that's how you become a great leader. It's not by getting rid of all the people that don't fit your exact personality. It's working with everybody. And so I don't think Matt Patricia has done a particularly good job at that. So that's what I want as a replacement, someone who can work with a bunch of personalities and get the best out of everybody.
And what do you make of the argument or sentiment that Matthew Stafford regressed this season?
Well, I think on film that's true. I think the big question is whether that's just an abnormal 4 game stretch for him, or whether that's the new normal. And I would argue it's probably not the new normal. I would argue that Stafford has the talent to really kind of assume all the good things we saw about him last year. We have to, point out he missed the last 8 games of 2019. We have to point out it was a shortened off season. He's got some new weapons there that he's probably still getting used to. And I think all that's important to kind of keep in mind. Now, I'm not excusing his play over the first 4 games. He made some really bad throws, some really bad decisions that you shouldn't see from an 11-year vet. But at the same time, he's still got the arm talent. I think he's still, you know, got that veteran mindset. I think he'll eventually return to form, and you also have to consider that some of the defenses that they've played, maybe outside of New Orleans, have been pretty good. So I do think we'll see Matthew Stafford kind of turn things around. But yeah, I would say people that are critical of his first 4 games absolutely should be. He hasn't been good.
And do you think he's pressing because the defense is so bad?
Yeah, I think that probably has a fair amount to, I mean, in order to win some of these games, it does seem like he has to play a perfect game, and he certainly hasn't been doing that, which I think magnifies, the interceptions, the extra sacks that he's taking on. And yeah, I mean, you also have to consider that he kind of has to press giving some of the players he has. You talk about Kenny Galladay and Marvin Jones, fantastic contested catch receivers, but also not great guys at creating separation, which means Matthew Stafford is dealing with tight windows pretty much every time he throws the ball to one of those guys. And so that's not an easy situation. It's a difficult situation. Luckily, they have a guy as talented as Matthew Stafford who has a cannon of arm and can fit in those, turkey holes or whatever you want to call them. But he's not going to be perfect. No one is perfect. And so when you're dealt with such a small margin of error, you're going to make some errors, and it's going to make the quarterback look bad. But the defense also not doing him any favors. So yeah, I think he probably has to press a little harder than maybe an average quarterback, and that leads to maybe more mistakes than you normally see.
And do you think the Lions should go ahead and give Kenny Galladay an extension?
I do, yeah, I do. As much as I was just talking about his inability to separate, he's a huge red zone threat. We saw the 11 touchdowns last year. I think he already has a couple this year in just a couple games. It's really puzzling to me that they didn't get one done in the offseason. And maybe they have a little bit of leverage because they can use the franchise tag in 2021, and maybe that was the plan all along, is to just kind of put that off until they have that leverage of the franchise tag, and then see if they can work out a long-term deal. But obviously, with the general manager kind of in flux here, might not be with the team in 2021. It remains kind of a situation up in the air. I think wide receiver is one of the most important positions on the field. I do think you can get some young talent in the draft, so maybe that's a plan as well. I also really like what we've seen from Quintus Cephas, but the more depth the better. And when you got, I think, what is a sure deal in a guy like Kenny Galladay, who's young, who's by all means a great locker room presence and a hard worker, I think you need to try to lock that up long term.
And Jeremy, my final question for you is, what do you think we can see for the rest of the season? And assuming the Ford family moves on, where would you like the next general manager to start? Because when you look at the Lions roster, there's not really any marquee or keystone players you can key on. And I'm not even sure Stafford will go through another rebuild if they move on from Matt Patricia.
Yeah. It's hard for me to say I expect anything else of the season than what we've seen. The defense is really the big issue, and you got to hope they figure things out during the bye week. But until I see it on the field, I'm not going to believe it. And so I do think we're going to continue to see this team struggle. Given the next 7 games, I do think there's a chance that they hover around 500. Maybe they could certainly get there with games against the Jaguars and the Falcons, and teams that are struggling just as hard as they are. So I do think there's a chance that they keep their head above water for a little bit, and maybe even look like they might contend for one of those wild card spots into maybe November. But obviously the schedule gets a little tougher after that. So I do think we probably end the season with, like you said, a change in general manager and a change in head coach. And if that's the case, I think the first part I want this new general manager come in and do is really look at that front 7 on the Lions defense and get some pass rushers, get some playmakers. Because you're right, there really is no marquee player on this team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Getting a Khalil Mack type of pass rusher would do wonders for this team. I mean, Joey Bosa's, Nick Bosa's, like, we see the impact that those kind of players make. And I don't know if there's going to be that kind of guy available in free agency or the draft or wherever they're picking. But that, to me, it has to be almost priority number 1, because those players can be so disruptive and so game changing. I do kind of like the secondary. I think it's young and going to improve. It's not great right now, but I like all the pieces they have there. I like the pieces that they have on the offensive line. But pass rushers and linebackers, to me, needs to be the focus of the next general manager to get this defense in a place where it's respectable, because right now it just isn't.
Hey, Jeremy, I could talk to you for hours about Lions football, but I'll end the conversation there. And thank you for your time and talking Detroit Lions football. Hopefully, they don't make us suffer through the last 12 weeks like they did the first 4. Thanks for your time, and great to see you this morning.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I'll return anytime you want me.
Fantastic, Jeremy. That was